Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Underwater Photography Show. I am Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard.
And today we're going over a pretty unique lens. So today we're going to talk about the Nikon, not Nikonos, 13 millimeter rectilinear lens. So the reason we bring this up is because one of them, it's a really rare lens. It is known for being the widest distortion-free lens ever made. And if you have 50 grand lying around, you could have bought the one that just sold on eBay. So Alex, if you would like to talk a little bit about the lens, does it have a place in underwater photography if somebody could make it work underwater? And just your thoughts in general on rectilinear versus fisheye.
I'm not going to answer that question too quickly, otherwise it'll be the end of the episode. But I think it's a really fascinating thing because underwater photographers love wide-angle lenses. It's what underwater photography is all about. And potentially the best ever wide-angle lens ever made, surely that would be on the top of every underwater photographer shopping list. And I would argue no. And the reason for that is a fewfold. And there's obviously some practical reasons with this particular lens, like the fact it won't autofocus with any modern cameras. It's not an autofocus lens, so it's a manual focus lens. And it won't talk very well to a lot of cameras either. And it probably physically won't fit inside many underwater ports. But we'll ignore those factors because those are the boring factors why you don't want to drop 50 grand on a wide angle lens. But the reason is, for me, is that this lens is super expensive because it's got an amazing distortion correction. So every single straight line stays straight in the picture. Everything is rendered distortion free. And that, for me, is not a desirable thing underwater. Partly it's not desirable because we don't have a lot of straight lines to worry about. But the real factor that I think is not desirable is I think, and I not just think, I strongly believe that it's the distortion in my fisheye lenses that makes my pictures powerful. And actually, I think a lot of people, when they come to underwater photography from land photography, they think that the distortion of a fisheye lens is a horrible thing. And people's desire is, I want a wide angle lens, but I don't want the fisheye distortion. And my argument, which I think is just not spoken enough about by underwater photographers, is that it's actually not just the super wide view of a fisheye lens, but also that barrel distortion that gives our images power and makes our underwater images strong and impactful to look at. And the reason for that is that a fisheye lens, I'll try and look at the screen and do it. A fisheye lens, if you have a subject in the foreground of a picture, which is the thing that you're lighting with your strobes in a wide angle shot, a fisheye lens will pull that subject towards the viewer and really create a three-dimensional looking picture. It'll make that subject matter, that central area of the picture, bigger relative to a non-distorting lens. And that for us is a great thing as underwater photographers. We want to have our subject bigger and our background looking further away. And that's exactly what the barrel distortion of a fisheye does. So although this 13mm Nikon old lens is distortion free and it's super wide, it would actually push subject matter away from you. And therefore wouldn't create images with as much impact as a lens with the same angle of view and with that fisheye distortion, because that fisheye distortion is creating the drama and is emphasizing our foreground subject. So I think for me it was an interesting thing to talk about because it makes that point that you hear a lot of new people to underwater photography saying, I don't want the distortion of a fisheye. And I think they miss the point that it's actually that distortion that makes so many underwater pictures impactful. Now, there are some underwater photographers who are brilliant at shooting non-fisheye wide-angle lenses. And I would refer people to have a look at Brian Skerry's photography in particular. He's someone I've always thought is brilliant at composing images with non-fisheye wide-angle lenses. And certainly when I teach wide-angle composition, I always make a point of saying to people that when you're shooting with a fisheye and when you're shooting with a non-fisheye wide-angle, the way you use your frame is very different. You compose the pictures really different, even if you're shooting the same scene, the same subject matter, because the fisheye is going to emphasize your central area subjects and pull them towards the camera. The rectilinear is a much more less distorted view, and it tends to emphasize much more the surroundings around the subject and not so much the subject. And I think if you switch between them as a photographer, you need to make that switch in your approach. But I would argue that 95 times out of 100, I'd much rather have that fisheye distortion that grabs that subject and thrusts it to the, into the face of the viewer and really creates an underwater picture that's impossible to ignore. And it's because it's that foreground, it's the bit that we can light. And it'd been really useful to have it for this talk, but I haven't got one. Is a comparison of when you shoot the same scene with a fisheye and a rectilinear. And what you see is the fisheye sees wider into the corners, but at the same time, it makes that foreground subject actually bigger than the less wide viewing rectilinear lens. And that, for me, is actually why the fisheyes are so powerful.
And that's probably why, well, it's definitely why the Nauticam EMWL has been so popular, is because it's essentially doing a fisheye's job with significantly smaller creatures, where it overemphasizes the middle and makes the background kind of fade away.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's ironic.
Also in the, oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say it's ironic that Brian is known for all of the rectilinear shots, because isn't one of his quotes, maybe it's not him, maybe I'm crediting him with somebody else's quote, that the close focus wide angle is the most impactful or the most beautiful type of underwater image or something like that, something along those lines.
I mean, that's from his book with Howard Hall. And I think it's more that perhaps, I mean, I don't know Brian Skerry's approach, but I would think that he feels that the more truthful rectilinear lenses are probably more fitting for his audience in National Geographic than the fisheye shot. He's not trying to win a underwater photography competition. He's trying to communicate things about the ocean, and maybe he feels the more faithful approach of the rectilinear. I just noticed down the years he's real master at composing those rectilinear shots, where I would have seen that same subject matter, got my fisheye on, and done it this way, and I see how he goes in a very different direction. So I just thought that was worth mentioning. So yeah, to come back to this super expensive wide angle lens, for me, yes, 120 degree wide angle would be pretty cool underwater without any distortion. I have to say, though, I'd probably prefer 130 degree WWL or WACP. Have the zoom, be wider, be tighter, and have that little bit of fisheye distortion to give my images that pop. And it's because, I don't know if I explained it clearly before, but it's because that fisheye distortion works so well with how we light the pictures. It emphasizes the bit we can light, which is why the fisheyes work so well. Because it's that foreground bit, which is the bit we can light with our strobes, that the fisheye lens pops out and pulls towards the camera and actually makes bigger than a rectilinear wide angle lens at the same distance would show that bit. Because the angle of coverage is better. And it's why when Nauticam were developing the FCP, I was very insistent in that development process when they asked me for my opinion, that the lens should keep all the fisheye distortion. They shouldn't try and get rid of the fisheye distortion, which is what they did with the WACP too. That was about trying to keep it as rectilinear feeling as possible. And actually, I like shooting the WACP2 because it is rectilinear feeling, and it's slightly different. But as an everyday lens, I'd much rather have that fisheye look. So yeah, I'm a no vote to the Holy Grail Nikon lens for use underwater.
But it also does say here, if anybody has 150 grand to drop, there is now a Nikon 6mm rectilinear lens on eBay. So if anybody wants to go check that out.
Oh, is that the rectilinear? I don't know that lens. Is that a rectilinear, or is it the fisheye that can see more than 180 degrees?
Yeah, you're right. It's the 220 degree fisheye. Super exaggerated fisheye.
Yeah, that one I would quite like to think about trying underwater. I think that's the one they developed for astronomical photography at the poles to be able to use for that. But yeah, I'd definitely love a fisheye that could see 200 degrees plus. That would definitely get my vote. That
would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, you probably get your fins and all that kind of stuff in your pictures a lot more. You have to be a lot more careful.
I'm good at hiding behind my camera, so
there you go. But if that's all we've got on this lens, Alex, Naya's she's done with this episode, it sounds like. Well, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you in the next one.